This episode is brought to you in part by Akunu. Akunu for Sales is the first buyer-aware platform for account-based selling on Salesforce. Akunu integrates your sales process with buyer behavior to verify buyer-seller alignment and increase confidence in the status of your deals. It eliminates time-consuming data entry for sales reps and makes your sales pipeline and deal review meetings data-driven and much more efficient, giving your sales reps and their managers the time and insights needed to win more deals. So do you know how your deal review process stacks up against other B2B sales organizations? Visit akunu.com/accelerate to access Akunu's benchmark report revealing the deal review habits of B2B sales managers and tips for managing deal reviews. See how you stack up and create your action plan for a better deal management. Get your report at akunu.com/accelerate. That's AKOONU.com/accelerate. This episode of Accelerate is brought to you in part by Discover.org. Looking to close 4 times as many deals in half the time? Discover.org's industry-leading, human-verified sales intelligence gives you all of the data and insights like direct dials, org charts, planned projects, verified emails, and executive moves you need to stop wasting time on research and spend more time talking to the right decision-maker with the right message at the right time. Their team of 250-plus sales researchers do all the work so that you don't have to. 2,500 companies are already using Discover.org to win more deals. So check them out at www.discoverorg.com. That's www.discoverorg.com. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 603 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Join me today on Accelerate is my guest, Gabe Larsen. Gabe is the VP at InsideSales Labs, a part of InsideSales.com. And in today's conversation, we're going to talk about the sales cadence. Gabe's group has conducted research, produced a report about the state of the cadence, if you will. And they collected a lot of really interesting data that Gabe and I are going to talk about. I mean, one for me is sort of a salient point that I'm not sure that they meant to be a conclusion drawn from the report, but is I think the data calls into question the whole idea of whether a cadence really exists yet in sales, at least as we're practicing it. And while I think it's a very useful and promising concept, I think the reality on the sales floor hasn't really caught up with it yet. So from my perspective, the value of this report that we talk about today is that it shows that in terms of our sales processes, educating our salespeople and our sales managers, is that, wow, we've got a lot of room for improvement out there. But anyway, it's a fascinating conversation we're having, so make sure you stick around for that. If you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/603. Now, before I talk with Gabe, let me remind you that today's show is brought to you in part by Discover.org. The Discover.org platform is a game changer for sales and marketing. The feature-rich sales intelligence platform is supported by 250-plus researchers who continually update contact data and provide account-specific insights to help sales and marketing teams break ahead of the pack. So see the product live at discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. That's discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. And today's episode is also brought to you in part by our friends at Akunu. Akunu for Sales uses a visual framework to help sales reps sell in complex accounts and help sales managers coach and manage their reps, and enables sales organizations to improve their sales performance by surfacing the information that drives better sales execution and keeps sales reps and sales managers focused on following your sales process and engaging at the right buyers at the right time. All right, let's jump into it now with Gabe Larsen. Gabe, welcome to Accelerate.
Oh, man. Well, I am excited, Andy. I mean, this is a long time coming. Big fan of your show. Excited to talk to the audience about all things sales.
All right. Well, we're definitely going to do that. So the first thing is like a standard question I ask all my guests to start the show, and that is, in your mind, in your opinion, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales reps today?
Yeah, it's always more leads and better leads. There's millions of challenges, but I still believe, Andy, if you can get prospects who are likely to buy from you, good quality leads, and you can get enough of them, sometimes even bad sales reps can do pretty well with that. And so, gotta find more and better leads. It's all about the leads.
So it's all about marketing.
And the partnership with it. I do think the sales and marketing, constant debate about the division there is, I'm a kind of guy who generates a lot of my own stuff, to be honest. One of the reasons I got into kind of the world of podcasting and writing was to in a lot of ways be the CEO of my own territory and take back control of who I deal with and who I don't deal with.
Well, we're gonna talk about all that as we get into the show, because I mean, with your work at InsideSales.com or the Inside Sales Labs.
Yeah, correct. So I run what we call our labs division, which is our innovation, research, and kind of best practice division here at InsideSales.com.
Okay, and so you guys are producing a ton of research. You're, I'm sure, analyzing usage on your system as well as independently researching people and their best practices, you said. So we're going to talk today. You had produced a research report recently about the sales cadence. And so if people aren't familiar with that term, let's explain for them what that is.
Yeah, well, just to kind of add on to that, our labs group, we have a fun advantage of, each month we'll do a research report either on behavioral type sales concepts, meaning, what is the right time to make a phone call or the best time to make an email, and we'll look at observed data, what actually is happening, and then on the flip side, we'll do survey data, right, where we'll just ask business leaders their top challenges, etc. So one of the recent reports we put out is this sales cadence concept. It's an interesting buzzword, but truthfully, to your point, Andy, one of the things that really came out of it was what the hell is a sales cadence? When we started asking people, a lot of people saying, well, they had all these different definitions. So we're on about our 43rd iteration right now, but a sales cadence to us is a sequence of activities to increase contact and qualification. And now I say it's the 43rd version because all of those words mean something very specific. Sequence is a little more data driven. When we talk about activities, there's in a cadence, there's 6 types of activities: phone, email, voicemail, social, high impact mailers, text messages. All of those can be brought into a cadence. Now, a lot of people think it's just about getting in contact with somebody, but great cadences don't just get in contact, but they allow you to educate and potentially even qualify your buyers if you do it the right way.
Okay. Yeah. And I agree. That's a great definition of it. What was sort of interesting about the data, though, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I mean, the big, and we'll dive into this, but the big conclusion I drew from the report was that, yeah, it's a great definition. No one's doing it.
Can I say something funny on top of that real fast?
Sure.
Do you mind?
Sure.
So one of the funny things is, again, in this report, we did a little bit of qualitative and a little bit of quantitative. What I mean by that is we actually went out and we audited. So we went to all the Fortune 500 websites and we submitted these entities. We created entities, companies with real websites, real email addresses, real entities. And then we tracked as an external party how those entities, how these companies followed up with it. Then in addition, we asked sales reps how they believe that they handle some of these inquiries. So the funny thing was, when we asked sales reps, just as an example, how many times do you think you touch an inbound lead? The interesting thing is we got a para of about 12 to 15. Now that depends if you kind of include social or not include social. But the bottom line is when we looked at what the actual data was, it was 4.05. Now, Andy, that's like a 300% difference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In what people think they're doing versus what we're actually doing. Now, there's certainly some latitude. There's some things you got to take into consideration. But at the highest level, I think sometimes we think we're a little better than we are. I think I go to the gym 6 times a week, and unfortunately, I don't. But
well, no, I think this is, and you and I touched a little bit on this before we started recording, is that, yeah, I think this is sort of the big problem we have with so much of what's done in terms of research in sales today is that the bulk of it are salespeople or sales managers or sales leaders self-reporting. And what I found valuable about what you're doing here is that you're actually measuring. And when we actually measure, then it's like, oh, okay, we got a difference. We've got a difference here, but you see it throughout, right? I mean, we look at CSO Insights reports, for instance, and they survey, and it's a great survey. I mean, lots of interesting data in there, but it is self-reported.
That's right.
And so, yet it's taken as gospel, right?
Yeah.
It's taken as gospel by maybe CEB, same thing. I mean,
CEB, you're 70% down the buying journey, 65% down the buying journey.
That's self-reported.
Yeah.
So, but the fact is, that's an article of faith for some large fraction of people in sales. And, regardless of the fact that it's not necessarily, it's different by segment, right? It could be true for some segments. I think it definitely is, but isn't for others and so on. So, but anyway, without getting sidetracked on that, I liked what I saw in the report just because I said it was based on things that are actual happening. So you guys,
and I gotta just put one kind of stamp on that, Andy, because this has become, I think, a problem in sales. And it's not a problem because I am a believer in survey data. I think it's fascinating. To your point, probably need to look at it, not with a grain of salt, but make sure you look at the overall, and then if you can, dive into how does your industry look at it, or how do other companies who are a little more like you, so that you can try to get a little more applicability. But this is a problem. I had someone the other day around social selling. A lot of anecdotal information. As a rep, I believe if I social sell, I do better than if I don't social sell. And this is one area where it's like, I put out a real battle cry, and I got some literally, I got some death threats almost when I wrote an article called The Death of Social Selling. And I called this all out and said, we got to get away from this kind of survey opinion data on social. We got to get to some facts. I want to see LinkedIn and some of these other companies give me the data. Or I want to see something meaty. Like I just ran a study, Andy. We looked at 10 million sales opportunities, and that's million, right? We looked at 10 million sales opportunities, and we looked at what happens at the end of the month and end of the quarter. Sometimes sales reps, they do a little wonky stuff, but
sometimes
we didn't ask them what they did. We looked at what actually happens to 10 million sales opportunities, and we found some fascinating stuff that people are doing and money they're potentially leaving on the table. But I challenge the industry on social. I want something like that. I want to look at 10 million LinkedIn messages, and I want to compare them to 10 million emails, and I want to see what's happening. No more of this kind of survey stuff. So finding a balance is something I'm trying to push, and I hope we all can get a little closer to using both.
Yeah, right. I think there's room for both, but the anecdotal, it drives me nuts. And but that's sort of human nature. It's sort of what we do. We have our built-in biases. We want to believe certain things are true because of what we stand for or whatever. Yeah, but we need to shine the light better than we have. So let's dive into the Cadence thing. So a lot of interesting things to unpack here that I think people find really fascinating. So you defined 5 key components of a cadence, which is number of attempts, total number of touches, the media in terms of what are you using, email, voicemail, so on, the duration, the length of time from start to finish, spacing, gap between attempts, and content as your messaging utilized. So if we look at attempts, let's just start that. You start talking about 4. The average number of attempts per lead to contact was 4. We'll say 4, right? No, it's 4.05, but 4.
Right.
Which I find sort of interesting because there's also research out there somewhere that's saying that it takes 19 attempts to get hold of a B2B prospect.
Yeah, but again, that information,
self-reported,
we're going to keep bringing that back because I've got a study right now. I'm looking at nearly 1 billion phone calls. Everybody's saying the phone is dead, and I can say, again, average contact rate, conversations over 2 minutes is in that about 5 to 12% mark, meaning 5 out of every 100 calls, 10 out of every 100 phone calls, we're having a 2-minute conversation. So I don't know about that. I'd be hesitant about the 20 touches, but again, you got to take it for what it's worth.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that's again, I can sit in presentation. I guarantee you, I can go to a sales conference. I'll hear that statistic a dozen times.
They love it though. You're right.
Everybody loves it. So. Because I think it's used because these reps know, okay, that they're only making 4 phone calls before they give up, all right, or 4 attempts, whether mix of phone calls and emails. They know they're only doing 4, so they're saying, oh, boy, this job's so hard because it takes 19 and I only have time to do 4.
Yeah. That's that. I can't add anything to that. You're exactly right.
And so the other thing you found I thought was really interesting is that 40% of your Cadence audits basically had no follow-up at all. So what we're saying is that 40% of leads are independent of how they're developed. I assume most of these you're talking about were inbound leads.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So 40% of the leads, no follow-up at all. And virtually another fifth, and then almost 20% more, one attempt, which is basically the same as no attempts.
Yeah, there's a couple things with this, and again, I think it is data, and there's some good and bad about this data that we could certainly go into. But one of the things we're certainly finding, and this is actually a lot more predominant in the U.S. than it is in Europe, and that is kind of number one, a love of email. So in the U.S., sales reps are we know from data now that U.S. reps are sending just in general more emails than Europe. So there does seem to be a little bit of a love of email. So when we looked at these cadences, you'll see more of a dominant kind of email approach. But number two is we've kind of moved a little bit. When it was the HubSpot kind of inbound model, and there was a high velocity approach, and inbound leads it was kind of the gravy train that everybody went to. There's been more of a movement, I think. And again, this is kind of my interpretation, if you will, but a little more of a movement to this outbound or this account-based model, if you will, or being more strategic and going after bigger fish. And in some ways, I think we've neglected, and again, the data shows it, that we're not treating maybe these inbound leads as we potentially should.
Yeah. Well, I think I probably in agreement with you, and I would say Ken Crow, because I have talked with Ken about this. They all need to be followed up. I mean, they come in. It's like they deserve a phone call, or at least, or an email, right? Yeah. I mean, so there's a study, and the reason I bring this up, and people say, "Oh no, I can tell just by looking at them; these are crap," and so on. Is there was a study that was done recently on emails, and what the person had written about it, and the author of the study was saying is that there's tremendous value even from unopened emails that they can trace, and they're doing this more with consumer stuff, but they could trace bumps in e-commerce traffic based on just virtue of sending emails, not that they were necessarily opened, right? That the commerce rate exceeded the open rate. And so what they're saying is, hey, there's value even in unopened email. So
interesting.
You sort of have to think about that when we're sending something into people's inboxes, is they may see it even if they don't read it.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a mini touch, and you touched on this just a little bit, and I want to mention it because a lot of people, when they see this data, their first response is, oh, well, if a lot of these were quote unquote, fake or, profiles that were designated, and we kind of went to these companies and submitted them online, I assume that everybody just knew that they were fake. And this would be a little longer conversation, but as we looked at the data, it was real interesting to see that could well be true. Certain organizations, they looked at it and thought it was fake, but I'm telling you, then certain organizations looked at it and actually called it and made it more intense with their follow-up. And so it comes into that question of, the part of the problem is these reps trying to kind of sniff it out. One rep thinks it's really good, and I got one lead that has some leads I have like 20 phone calls on over a 40-day period, and then another person didn't even contact it. And so when people say, "Oh, I bet everyone just sniffed it out," it's like, well, certainly not everyone did. And then that comes to this idea of I lick my finger and I try to figure out the prioritization strategy. And I don't know. I think reps sometimes get into a little bit of a conundrum because maybe they don't know what is best and what's not best.
Well, and then I think it's sort of all mixed in, especially in inside sales organizations. It's all mixed in with the pressure to be able to do the number of dials you're supposed to do every day, and then the fresh contacts and to me, I think one of the potential lessons that I was taking away from this was that, this burning desire to hit your activity metrics is having an impact on on just selling, right? Just actually getting hold of the leads, is developing and nurturing the leads, because it's all about that first new email and first new call.
Yeah, and I do think sometimes this debate of, some leaders say, I don't care what you do as long as you hit your numbers. A lot of companies maybe go too far and say you got to have a certain number of activities. And, And the interesting thing about both of those are they're internal facing. Oftentimes I'll tell leaders, maybe go external facing. What would your customer want? And in this case, this specific use case, we just need to make sure that when they say they want to be contacted, we do actually contact them. But let's start with the customer first.
Well, that's a huge topic we could spend an hour on just itself in terms of, a lot of the behavior I think that we see driven is increasingly as a result of the technologies people are using. This technology enables certain behaviors in sales and enables expectations of certain volumes of activity taking place. And I think what's happened is I'm taking one of the takeaways I'm taking from the study is given how little follow-up is actually done in a comparative sense. And I don't think it's because salespeople are lazy. I think, to your point you're making, is they're feeling conflicted. And, they're trying to do the best they can, but, they're feeling pressure from both sides. Yeah. And as a consequence, I think, this nurturing and development of leads that have come in is really suffering.
Well, and there's so many different kind of stories, right? I was at an organization and they get 35,000 inbound leads a month. They have about 20 reps, and there's just no possible way to get all those, right? And so you got to find a quality and quantity. You got to find a way to decipher which ones are better, and then make sure others kind of go down maybe more of a nurturing path. Some people don't, they get 1 or 2 leads a year, and they treat them like gold. And so certainly each company needs to figure that out, kind of where they are.
Well, and they need to go to marketing and say, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
That's just ridiculous. What are you spending our money on?
Well, and there's still that debate, right? I mean, what is marketing's primary role? Do we play more of a PR, or do we play more of a lead gen? And the answer is usually both, or certainly somewhere in the middle. But I'm more biased. If marketing's not producing leads, I often don't see the value. So
right. Well, let's not go down that road. But I mean, I think that you can't have marketing running victory laps saying 35,000 leads when they can't be followed up.
Yeah.
So even marketing could be doing a much better job saying, okay, well, how could we really fine tune this so we're generating 5,000 really good leads a month? I mean, they obviously have a recipe for generating leads, right? Okay, right. So we won't come back and hammer marketing on this. All right, so email, in terms of the media used, the most common media used in follow-up was a single email. So I thought that was interesting. If they say half of all your audits were attempted, never received a phone call, just an email.
Yeah. And again, that plays, I believe, having done some kind of interviews, et cetera, if you look at that 4.05 kind of on the attempts, right, the majority of those are emails, even if you do kind of bring in phone calls. And then as we look at kind of follow-up strategies, again, email still kind of dominates. And again, it's an easier method, it's an easier mode, and so I can kind of auto-program and I can act more like a marketer, and in some ways that's good, in some ways that does a lot of damage.
Yeah, well, I mean, your job in that role is to talk to someone. It's not to have an email conversation with them, it's to talk to them. I mean, I imagine most SDRs don't get credit for a sales conversation that's conducted via email.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. I mean, more and more, a back and forth email exchange is often considered a conversation, if you will, and because people are using it so much, they got to find a way to see if they can actually track it better. Yeah.
Well, they're kidding themselves, so that's the case. And that contributes, I think, to a whole other issue, which maybe we'll get time to, which is just we sort of go through this report, and then we sort of compare it to sort of what I consider the really unacceptably low close rates that we have in many of our sort of leading edge, quote unquote, leading edge sales organizations. It also stems from this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that, and I think that is something that's plaguing our generation a little bit as we get into more and more passive communication types. Again, you always want to find the balance, but got to be careful where you find that balance.
Yeah, I think that people have sort of lost the recipe and the fact, the plot thread, if you will, that emails are to set up a voice conversation because that's how you build a connection with somebody. I mean, it's really hard to build trust purely through email communication.
Yeah. You got to bridge that to a more kind of more aggressive, and whether that's in person or phone, etc.
Yeah. And so, as I said, having lost the plot thread, the email is always to set up a conversation between two people.
Yeah.
All right. So your duration across all cadence, I thought that was also interesting, was less than 5 days. So basically, we're going to go out, we're going to touch you once, maybe twice, and if we don't engage in less than 5 days, yeah, so long. See ya.
Yeah, right. And again, that's the average. Obviously, some went a little longer, some went a little shorter. But and it is interesting because when it comes to particularly inbound leads, there is something about this concept of I call it the law of immediacy. You do have better options, better opportunities to have conversations when top of mind awareness is present. And so, fairly quickly when that lead comes in, the first day, the second day, every day that passes, you certainly kind of lose that top of mind awareness. But 5 days, it's still pretty short. I would say when I develop and have seen more cadences be effective, I'd probably extend it a little bit longer than that. Certainly, the problem is when you combine duration and attempts, that's where it gets messy. You'd like to have kind of more attempts and a little longer duration to kind of tighten that down as far as an optimal cadence goes.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the tool vendors that sell applications and enable you to set up cadences and automate those, give their examples. And as in one presentation, they talk about a 7x7 cadence, right? 7 touches in 7 days. Which, actually is not a bad idea, but clearly, not being implemented to any great extent, based on your audits. So, I mean, and one thing that wasn't really, concluded in the report is there sort of an optimal recommendation that comes from this? Because that's, again, I think this is where we always have this disconnect between the promise of the technologies that will help us become more productive and how we're actually using them. Right. And this part of the reason I'm so fascinated by this report is just like, okay, here's the yawning gap, right? I mean, I go to conferences, I cruise through websites, and to try to stay abreast of the technology as much as anyone. And I talk to hundreds of founders and CEOs of sales tech companies on the show. And the promise is great, but we're not using them, the technology. And I sort of wonder, in your opinion, why do you think that is? Why are we not taking advantage of these capabilities? Is it just they really don't align with reality, or is it what we're doing is we're just too stuck in the past and we're not taking advantage of these innovations to become more productive in these regards?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously work for a tech company, so I probably need to be a little careful in what I say. But I think the truth with some of the innovations is a lot of leaders, they've got so much going on, so much to do, that oftentimes systems or innovations, if you will, are looked at as kind of a stopgap, almost like the system will just save me. I'll just give it to my reps and it will fix itself. I often use the analogy, if I give a weight scale to someone, it'll help them lose weight. Yeah, that's what it'll do. A weight scale doesn't help anybody lose weight. It plays a role in it, but really the program around the weight scale, the whole exercise regime, in conjunction with a tool to kind of measure progress, that's where the power comes in. And so I think a lot of times we give a tool and we say, oh my goodness, now our cadence is going to be fantastic, as an example. But I mean, a rep can still do whatever they want. They may not know why they need to do it more, so they may still just say, what, I've tried this guy 2 or 3 times, and then they exit him out of the cadence. So unless you kind of match this concept of people, systems, and processes, and I don't mean to be a little too cliche, but you've got to have an optimal process. These reps need to know the why, obviously, of why they're doing it. Then when you put in an acceleration tool, you'll actually see it accelerate the process. Acceleration tools will decelerate bad processes, and they'll accelerate good processes. And so unless you got more coaching and optimal processes, these systems, they're just not saviors. They're just not going to make you money, because it just doesn't work like that.
Well, and I wonder if part of that is the fact that there's sort of these de facto models that exist in terms of activity levels that you see and I see, new companies sort of fall into, right? This is the model we need to follow. And so thus we're going to do this, and that's where we're going to get our reps, and they're going to make so many dials and so many contacts a day, da 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 da. And we've become hooked on that. And because it's generating a certain level of performance.
Yeah.
But my observations are we're struggling to exceed this certain level of performance and even sustain it. In fact, I'm seeing some, again, anecdotal data saying that actually, we're becoming less productive again, and close rates are falling, and we're burning through swaths of potential prospects because we're basically carpet bombing them with content, and it's like, it's so. How do we fix that, right? I mean, how do we save ourselves from and be able to use these tools the way they're intended to be used? And I think that's part of the reason why we don't, is we're just sort of hooked on. Somebody says, yeah, I can do this cadence, but suddenly it's, I can't do my 50 dials a day if I'm doing this cadence, even with the automation. So which goes?
Yeah,
well, I get measure on the dials, so the follow-up goes.
Yeah. And I think there is just kind of balance in all things, right? This is the problem. I think they keep swinging the pendulum. So it's not great when leaders just say it's all about results, because oftentimes, you get mediocre results. You could get a lot better results. It's also probably not good to go 100% on the activities and double down on the activities. So I feel like if you can find that balance, and then remember this concept. I love the line, personalization trumps automation. So we got to remember we're human. You'll see a lot of conversations going on around like chat bots, and I am in the camp that calling these chat bots by a name, Lucy, and acting like they're human when they're just not. It's kind of like it's the same concept with email. Where obviously all these sales reps have these marketing email tools, and I just send 15 emails that I just load them in and shoot them off, and I'm acting like I'm, quote unquote human when it's just a machine. And don't get me wrong, there's always a balance of personalization and automation, but you got to remember it will always trump it. Personalization will always trump automation. So find the balance in all things. Remember, personalization trumps automation, and you're going to be walking a line. I mean, this is kind of life. I wish we could. I wish it was simpler. I wish it was easy, but sometimes you'll probably go a little too far in one direction, and you may focus too much on activities. You may focus too much on the bottom of the pipe, or you may start throwing spam emails out, and you're just kind of getting people in different cadences. But you bring yourself back and try to get a little more personalization, and you keep pulling those different levers of personalization and automation until you find the right place.
So, all right, I'm going to take that a step further, because there's something that trumps personalization. That's humanization trumps personalization. We can't confuse personalizing emails with humanizing emails, right? I mean, just because we do a mail merge and throw somebody's first name on there, quote, personalize, it doesn't mean we're humanizing it. And it's the humanization that connects with people, not the personalization.
Interesting.
And so, we're missing a layer, which is part of the problem. And again, because people are too busy, given the expectations, to humanize. And so, in any large population, right, you could do something wrong, quote unquote wrong, and still get 20% of the people to do it, right? I mean, that's sort of where we are with SaaS, right? I don't think you can argue that, hey, it's efficient. Sure, it's efficient. But can anybody say, look, sort of this average 20% close rate out of qualified prospects we're seeing in a lot of SaaS companies that are held up as sort of the standard, is that good? Well, no. Objective measure, that's not good. So, but what we're doing is we're gearing the whole process to keeping the 20%, as I was saying we should do is change our process to make that 25%, even if we do less of the activities up front. So we've got this conundrum that I think we're really struggling with. And this humanization is one of the conundrums, because we become incredibly more effective if we learn how to humanize our communications.
Well, and I think there are technologies. It's interesting to see this space of sales technology and how it develops. this is kind of the world I play, and you get this kind of hot jumpstart company, and 2 years later they're doing a fire sale, but for 2 years they were kind of the darling of the industry. And I had a VC the other day tell me that 10 million is the new 1 million. Unless you're hitting 10 million and ARR, you don't get the money you did like back in the day. But I mean, there's so many great technologies out there, but some of them are trying to get into that, quote unquote, humanization, personalization. And sometimes that's difficult. And so I like this idea of having technology, again, not trying to, I know it's a little, I've always loved the Iron Man concept. Ken Krogh introduced that maybe 5-6 years ago. And, co-founder of InsideSales.com. And, that's the concept, right? Let's empower the individual rather than eliminate him, or let's not just let the machine run while the individual goes to lunch. The Iron Man suit made a regular person, well, a billionaire is maybe not a regular person, but you get the idea. You made him a super salesperson. And so I'd love to see more of that going on, where I'm fed the information about humanization, kind of using your terms, or I'm fed the ideas to what's going on with my cadence, and I can still react to it. But I feel, to your point, right now we're giving a lot to CRM. We're feeding a lot of data. It's not giving anything back. It's just a big kind of system of record.
Right.
And then we've got a couple of these really fun little quote unquote sales acceleration tools that, they're just marketing tools, and I can just run them like they're a machine. And it's not really the Iron Man vision that we have, and I think we're working towards it, but it's it's painful and it's baby steps.
Well, it is. And unfortunately, I think that sort of you look back sort of the history of sales and sort of what we've gone through even on the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years even, is that sometimes I think it's, we're more likely to have an actual human becoming a real Iron Man before we fundamentally change the way sales are done.
Right. Agreed.
And it would be great if, I love Ken's Iron Man metaphor, but if we come up with one that's based on reality instead of fiction, then we could it might
then it might be more achievable.
Might be more achievable, right? So anyway, there we go. All right. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We could go on forever. Gabe, it's been great to have you on the show, and great to talk to you as always. So tell people how they can contact you and learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm certainly on all your major channels. Catch me on LinkedIn. I'll be offended if you don't. If you want to learn a little more about cadence, we have a real fun tool just to kind of grade your own cadence against others. You can go to cadenceassessment.accelerateInsideSales.com, and you punch in your cadence numbers, and we'll score it based on kind of industry benchmarks. But check out some of our research, and again, catch me on LinkedIn at Gabe Larsen.
Yeah, you guys are doing, I said, a ton of good research. It's, more than anything, it's just, hopefully for people, it's thought-provoking, and that's really how you should take it.
That's a great point.
Don't take it as, oh, wow, let's go copy all what these people are doing, or, hey, we're great because this, no, let's, figure out what you need to be doing. And unfortunately, I think it's one of the problems we have with certain aspects of certain segments of sales organizations these days. It's hey, let's follow this model. We're being encouraged to follow this model to a T, and we need some innovation in there because we're getting stagnant. Even though supposedly it's leading edge selling, we're getting stagnant.
Right, and one of the reasons we call this kind of group labs. A lot of people will say, why do you call it labs? You guys wear white coats and you got rabbits or rats in there. The idea was to actually promote more of an experimentation and testing culture. So one of the things we do is we'll release again once a month just an experiment that we've done. So we just sent out 60 handwritten note cards, and we sent out 60 emails, the exact same copy, the exact same picture, and we wanted to test, and that's often the word, test what actually worked and what didn't work. And so if anything, you pull from InsideSales Labs is take what we have and go test it. It's always
exactly.
the four-letter word. Test it in your space and you'll figure it out. And salespeople aren't like marketing. We've still not gotten that. So that is our mantra, is that testing is actually the answer. We're not the answer, but testing is.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so true. I mean, look at any of this data, and we didn't really touch on this, and we'll extend for just a couple minutes to dive into it, is that trouble with all the data is that you are not normalizing it for the products being sold. Yeah, you do some breakdown by industry, but what's what's the average sales price, right, of the product?
Yeah.
What's the lifetime contract value? Who's doing the selling? Is it a small company selling to a small company selling to a big company? All these, I mean, I could list 30 variables,
all these different attributes. Yeah. And truthfully,
that impact this. And
having looked at that, that deal side, one of the things that really, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but man, one of the breakdowns we look at, industry is always great, but man, if you sell jumbo jets versus widgets, as you can imagine, whoa, it's so much different. You're all the numbers change, all the data changes. So it's a great point.
Yeah, but the thing that's sort of interesting, I think, on top of that, and this is, again, we'll maybe have you back, we'll talk about this, is one of the things I'm fixated on is this concept of productivity in sales, and I think we don't understand productivity in sales at all. And so I think, and I've done just sort of, based on my own experience and working with clients and customers and so on, is that actually, the number of touches and sales hours actually don't swing as widely based on the price of what you're selling as much as people think. And it's sort of interesting because people haven't really started really focused on this concept. Well, how much am I investing in this one opportunity, right? And we talk about cost of acquisition, but it's not, again, even those are pretty raw numbers. I ask CEOs, okay, well, great, tell me, so how many hours, sales hours, are you investing to take your average prospect from point of interest to close?
Yeah.
No one knows. Well, how can we not know that? Because then really the job of the reps ultimately is not to sell X amount. It should be generate so much per hour of selling time.
Yeah, an ROI with the cost of the goods, the sales rep.
Well, that's what productivity is. Productivity is not making 10 calls because there's no outcome, right? You just made 10 calls. So what have you produced? So it's, we don't tie activities to actual production, and the production is obviously dollar of revenue.
Yeah, I mean, and the numbers in most organizations, even as you say that, I don't think anybody could pull it. I mean, even if somebody said that's a great idea, Andy, I don't know if they could pull it out of their CRM. I don't think they could get it. No, it takes another system or two involved to do that. Though there are some companies that are starting to throw some of that in there a little bit. So, but it needs to go further, and that's, I think you alluded to this earlier, and we'll sort of wrap up with this, is that you said you're sort of skepticism about marketing. What are they really good for? Is I'm paraphrasing just so you don't get in trouble with your marketing people. Yeah, I was going to say, slow down, Andy. Slow down.
Well, you said they're mostly for lead gen, right? So, but we need to start having this conversation about how do we restructure this whole thing? Because somebody told me once that, and I think this is really true, is the way you should really look at this from a transformation standpoint is two functions. There's an acquisition and retention function that are sort of sales and marketing related. And then there's sort of branding. You can say, well, that's just sort of a corporate awareness building, right? But everything else should fall into one of those two camps. And so if we're saying, look, if we're going to structure our organization just by acquisition and retention, well, what's in acquisition? And suddenly these silos start going away. Because, you're not going to have one marketing, because there needs to be marketing and retention as well. But it's really its mission is retention. And so, that's how I'd restructure things. And I think that's the conversation that also people need to start thinking about is get rid of sales, get rid of marketing. We have acquisition and retention. I
love it. And we've moved to a model. It would actually be real interesting to kind of take it through, get your opinion, but we call it the growth team. And it's kind of changed we did some interviews with some large companies. And one of the things that really came out, and again, it was just interview data, but they said over specialization in some cases had been a real detriment to growth. And so we restructured our mid-market team around what we call a growth team. And so you have marketing and sales and client success and sales development all roll up to kind of one leader rather than kind of functional leaders. And it's been a real change. It's really made things different as people sit right next to each other and they all roll up to the same manager. So there is something to that. There's something about kind of looking at things different and seeing how it works.
Sure. Well, I ran those teams 25 years ago. Exactly like that. I mean, they were hallmarks of IBM and all the large, B2B sales teams back in the 60s and 70s, even before I got started. What goes around comes around, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm wearing jeans right now that don't fit. My wife bought them. They call them skinny jeans. So yeah, what goes around comes around.
they should fit. You get the ones with the flex fabric. They'll fit you. So.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Gabe. Great talking to you, friends. Make sure you check out Gabe and what they're doing at InsideSales Labs. And thank you for spending this time with us. Make sure you come back, join us again for our next great episode of Accelerate. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.